Hello, this is Ron Russell with Green Hills AEA. This is part 2 of our procedures overview for the changes July 2015. We left off at the K-12 matrix, and I'm picking up at the pre-K matrix. This is something new. You may recall that in the past, preschool students in early childhood education, there was not a matrix to guide the assignment of a weighting. One now exists that will be used statewide. You probably recall that all preschool age students are at least level 2. They start at level 2. So this matrix, if you take a look at it, shows the areas you would look at to determine whether or not the student would jump to a level 3. So you can see down here 0 to 3 points would be level 2. Level 3 would be 4 or more points. So let's just briefly go through this. If we look at number 1, health, physical, or behavioral support, and this is the issue of is health, physical, or behavioral support delivered in different settings by a paraprofessional. So this is looking at paraprofessional support, and our breakdowns are, again, looking familiar here: 49% or less of the school day, 50 to 74%, or greater than 75%. So this would be cases where paraprofessional assistance directly for a student is needed, and a breakdown of the percentage of the day. Then we go on to look at instructional support, the same idea, but it would be more for instruction versus health, physical, behavior. And again, the breakdown. So 1 and 2 are really looking at paraprofessional assistance and how that might be needed. So it would be an either or for the paraprofessional, or potentially a split between these two depending on the nature of the need for that student. Then we look at specialized transportation. Again, the same model as we see for the K-12 matrix. Do we need no transportation needs, all the way up to something like a specialized vehicle or within district special route and attendance services. So we would look at our transportation needs. And then the last area, again similar to the K-12 matrix, we look at assistive technology. We may have some preschool students that have fairly costly assistive technology needs, and that would impact the point levels versus different levels along the continuum. So again, as with K-12, ultimately the weighting is verified by the AEA, but when IEP teams submit the IEP in the web system, they would indicate either level 1 or level 3, and those are reviewed as needed. A couple clarifications in the guidance section. Paraprofessional time in 4-year-old programs. Code is mentioned here as far as the required staffing for preschool classrooms. Just a reminder that for supplemental weighting for special education purposes, these would be referring to paraprofessionals that are in addition to regular staffing needs. And finally, it's noted that there is some guidance here for unique circumstances in early childhood. It mentions here that if health needs, interpreters, other equipment purchases would exceed $8,000, that would also be a rationale to add a level. So it just addresses those unique circumstances. The last note here also applies for the K-12 matrix. It just reminds us that in some cases there may be a unique one-time cost for perhaps expensive equipment, and we would need to look at that IEP the following year and potentially adjust downward if that is a one-time purchase versus an ongoing kind of expense. Some clarifying language has been added regarding extended school year services. You can see in yellow highlights here some language that has been added to the guidance. And this first section talks about if an IEP meeting is held before the end of the first quarter, you'll probably recall in that extended school year form, there is a place to document data in the first quarter. That gets into the issue of recoupment of skills. And this just mentions that if an IEP meeting is held before the end of the first quarter, the team can indicate data not available at this time, and they would need to make a determination whether or not they have sufficient information to determine ESY for the following summer, or if that would need to be made at a later date through an amendment process. Down here, also in yellow, it just reminds us that the ESY form stays open and is modifiable for data and so forth after the IEP has been validated. It just reminds us if changes are made, Whether or not we would, after that is validated, whether or not we would need an amendment would depend. So, for example, it tells us here, changing the total hours or minutes of service, adding or deleting a service such as transportation, support, etc. These are things we might do. An IEP process is required, and the parents must have prior written notice. So if we'd made substantial changes, that would require the IEP to be modified through an amendment, through official channels. But it mentions changes that do not affect the kind or amount of extended services, changing the schedules from Thursday to Tuesday or so forth, or locations. That, of course, would require communication with parents, but would not require an IEP amendment or prior written notice. So just minor changes that don't change the essence of the IEP wouldn't need to be done through an amendment. Some text has been added to the manual regarding physical education, so we can go there and take some time to read through this guidance. Basically, there was not a lot of information in the manual about determining physical education programs for students with disabilities. So this text just really gives you some good guidance on whether or not a student needs general physical education versus modified versus specially designed. So take some time to look through that, and your IEP team will want to refer to this as needed. A good reminder, clarification that's also been kind of added. When physical education is specially designed for a student, that does require that to be documented on page F as a service, and an IEP goal and associated documentation would need to be collected. So teams will need to keep that in mind. When we go special designed, there should be additional documentation on page F, along with an IEP goal and data collection. In the manual here too, there's been some nice examples shown here. So just what the verbiage might look like for modified or specially designed physical education. So you can see some examples here that you could look at to give you an example of the kinds of details you might want to put to describe a student's needs in physical education. This next section where it says paraprofessional service codes, in the first video I basically addressed this when I was talking about the weighted matrix. There's just an increased emphasis on making sure that when we have specific paraprofessional services needed by students, that they are coded appropriately in the IEP. So again, rather than putting a general description as a support service, we would want to be very specific. So the TA is the instructional support, and the PP would be the health behavior, which is Medicaid billable. Okay, notice how it says here, do not use an activity support such as supplementary aid support for school personnel. This is a service, so these are coded in the service section, and that's really important, especially for these to be considered in the weighted matrix considerations. So we've talked about TA and PP. It also mentions here the HS code, and I'm going to jump quickly to our procedures guide here. There is a section that has a pretty lengthy list of the different codes that go in the IEP, and so if you look here, you'll see the PP, the paraprofessional services are Medicaid billable, and you'll see the description of the TA, which is sort of curriculum, academic kinds of support. But let's look at HS, health services. This is services provided by a qualified person trained by an RN or advanced degree nurse, and so that would be things like catheterization, tracheotomy, tube feeding, colostomy collection. Next, goal areas. Some additional language was added to kind of clarify the selection of goal areas in the Web IEP. So let's take a minute to look at that. In your guidance document here and in the release notes, you can we're kind of reminded when we add a goal, we select a certain goal area, and then there's an autofill of the different domains. The reminders are just simply, we can just read these down here. When several different goal areas, for example, maybe adaptive behavior or employability skills, math or financial literacy or adaptive behavior, when several different goal areas might match the content or the intent of the goal, any of the goal areas may be used. So sometimes it's just a choice, which goal area seems to fit better when several areas seem to fit. But with that, we're just reminded, in some cases, when several different goal areas, For example, behavior and employability skills accurately reflect different aspects of a concern, different ones. For example, reducing an undesirable behavior versus building positive, pro-social kinds of skills, each may be used to develop a goal. So that's sort of the discretion of the teacher or the individual writing a goal. We want to think through specifically, is it important to break an area of concern into multiple goals? If so, we should do that. But in some cases, several different areas may seem to fit a concern, and in those cases, one goal domain can be selected. This next section on manifestation determination, nothing has changed, but if we click here, a tool has been added, just this little kind of graphic with yes/no kinds of choices. This is just something that's available for teams to look at, looking at special circumstances and whether or not a behavior is a manifestation of the disability. So this has been added to the manual, and I think will be a good tool for teams to have on hand when they're going through manifestation discussions. So be sure to take a look at that and add that to your tool bag when these situations come up. And I would note that this matrix actually appears on the what they're referring to as a manifestation determination guide, which is essentially the form that we use to walk through that process. This will appear actually on the form, so it will be right there for the team, and this also appears in the procedures as well. This next section says prior written notice. Let's go there. This rules require that prior written notice must be given to the parents of a child with a disability a reasonable time before they would be deemed a child with a disability. So there's a couple things we want to look at here. Let's just click and look. A prior written notice must be given to parents of a child where we suspect they have a disability before the LEA or AA proposes to initiate or change a program or to do an initial evaluation. So even when we suspect a disability and we're looking at the potential for a student becoming eligible and having an IEP, prior written notice must be given. That being said, pay close attention to our note here. The elements of the prior written notice are already incorporated into the consent process and documentation. So in other words, when parents are signing consent for evaluation, that form itself is serving as a prior written notice. Okay, so that's already built in there, but that's in Iowa's method, that's fulfilling that requirement in IDA where we need to give parents prior written notice when we are suspecting a potential disability. The second one is it's pretty well known, but the language was just added with a little bit more clarity in the procedures. Prior written notice must be given to the parents of a child when parents have requested an evaluation and the LEA or AA refuses to initiate the evaluation. So that's really, really critical. I know we've talked about that before in different forums, but so for example, if a parent calls school or calls AA and says, I want a full and individual evaluation for my child, typically, we tend to do those evaluations if it's reasonable, if there's a reasonable cause to suspect a disability. In some cases, there would not be, but anytime we would refuse to do that evaluation, parents have to receive a prior written notice outlining the reasons for that. So teachers that are listening or school administrators, when we get in those situations, of course, you'd be working with your special education representative or someone from the AA, but we need to really give careful consideration as to whether or not we do an evaluation. We tend to err on the side of doing an evaluation if in doubt, but in those rare cases where a parent might ask and we would say we don't suspect, it's really important that a prior written notice be given. Okay, going back to the top here, I'm going to pause here at the end of this video's time slot. We have one more topic, and if you would bear with me and join me for part 3, it will only be about 5 minutes, but we're going to talk about primarily this topic of parent-provided services. So we'll talk about cases where parents might be providing a service such as transportation and how we would handle that in the IP. So I will see you in part 3. which should only be about 5 minutes or so. Thank you.